I never thought I would see the day when my stepfamily would be calling me nonstop. For 15 years, I was the outsider, the stepson who was never fully embraced. When my mother died 7 years ago, our already fragile connection dissolved completely. Last year, my stepfather updated his will, explicitly excluding me because I was not his blood. I accepted it and moved on with my life. Then, 3 weeks ago, my grandfather, on my mother's side, passed away and left me his entire estate worth over $3 million. Suddenly, my phone would not stop ringing with messages from the same people who once decided I was not family enough to inherit anything. Before I tell you how I handled this unexpected family reunion, let me know where you are watching from and subscribe to hear more stories about family inheritance and finding your way through life's most challenging moments. The earliest memory I have of my stepfather, William, is from when I was 6 years old. My mother, Elena, had been a single parent since my biological father abandoned us when I was just 2. She met William at a community fundraiser in our small town of Greenfield, Massachusetts. He was a successful accountant with his own practice, a widower with 2 children of his own, Patricia and Gregory, who were 8 and 10 at the time. Their courtship was brief, and within 8 months, we moved into William's spacious colonial house in the more affluent part of town. My mother was thrilled to provide me with what she called a complete family and the stability that came with William's financial security. I was too young to understand the complexities of blended families, but I sensed the shift in dynamics immediately. William was never cruel or abusive, but his affection was clearly reserved for his biological children. When he helped with homework, Patricia and Gregory received patient, detailed explanations. When it was my turn, his responses were shorter, more perfunctory. During weekend activities, he would beam with pride at their accomplishments, while offering me polite acknowledgement. These subtle differences were not lost on me, even as a child. Patricia and Gregory followed their father's lead. They were not outright hostile, but I was clearly not included in their sibling bond. They had inside jokes, I was not privy to shared memories I could not be part of, and a natural ease with each other that made me feel like a permanent guest in what was supposed to be my home. My mother tried to bridge these gaps in the beginning. She would suggest family activities that included all of us, equally encourage William to spend one-on-one time with me, and gently point out instances of favoritism. But over time, she seemed to accept the status quo, perhaps believing that having a financially stable home was worth the emotional compromises. The one person who never made me feel like an outsider was my grandfather Arthur, my mother's father. After my grandmother passed away when I was 4, he lived alone in a modest house about 20 minutes from us. My mother would take me to visit him every Sunday, and as I got older, I would often bike to his house after school or on weekends. Arthur had been an engineer before retirement, and his home was filled with books, old mechanical equipment, and half-finished projects. Unlike William's pristine showroom-perfect house, Arthur's place was lived in comfortable and endlessly fascinating to me. He taught me how engines worked, how to fix household appliances, and most importantly, listened to me with genuine interest. "You have got a good mind, Fernando," he would say, his eyes crinkling with pride when I solved a puzzle or fixed something under his guidance. "Always remember that your worth is not determined by others' perception of you." By the time I reached high school, the division in our household was firmly established. Patricia and Gregory were William's children. I was Elena's son. Family photos on the mantel showed this distinction clearly, with the 3 of them often grouped together while my mother and I stood slightly apart. When college applications came around, William proudly announced at dinner that he had set up trust funds for Patricia and Gregory's education. My mother glanced at me nervously before asking about my college plans. "Elena, we have discussed this," William said quietly but firmly. "Fernando can apply for scholarships and financial aid. He is bright enough to earn his way, and you know my agreement with Diane before she passed was to secure our children's future." I watched my mother's face fall, but she did not argue. That night, she came to my room with information about scholarships and loan applications, her eyes apologetic. "Your grandfather and I will help as much as we can," she promised. True to his word, Arthur contributed what he could to my education, and between his help scholarships and part-time jobs, I managed to attend a state university and graduate with a degree in computer science with minimal student debt. During those college years, my visits home became less frequent. Each return to William's house reinforced my status as an outsider. Patricia and Gregory, now adults themselves, would discuss family matters that excluded me by nature, reminiscing about their mother or planning future celebrations where I was an afterthought. After graduation, I took a job with a tech company in Boston, putting more physical distance between myself and Greenfield. I would return for major holidays and my mother's birthday, maintaining a cordial relationship with William and his children, but never developing the closeness my mother had hoped for. Then, 7 years ago, the tenuous balance of our family dynamic was shattered when my mother was diagnosed with aggressive ovarian cancer. The disease progressed rapidly, and within 6 months she was gone. I was 32 years old. During her illness, I took leave from work to be by her side as much as possible. William was present in his way, handling medical bills and logistics, but the emotional support came primarily from me and Arthur, who, despite being in his early 80s, visited daily. After her funeral, the distance between me and my stepfamily grew into a chasm. Without my mother as the connection, there was little reason for continued relationship. Our interactions became limited to obligatory Christmas cards and occasional messages on birthdays. My grandfather became my only real family. Despite the 45-year age gap between us, we grew even closer after my mother's death. I would drive to Greenfield every other weekend to check on him, help with house maintenance, and simply enjoy his company. We would talk for hours about everything from politics to philosophy, and he became my most trusted advisor. It was during one of these visits about a year ago that Arthur mentioned William had contacted him about some legal matters related to my mother's death. "He is updating his will." Arthur said, his voice careful. "He wanted me to know that he is leaving everything to Patricia and Gregory. He thought you might have expectations since you were Elena's son and wanted me to prepare you." I felt a strange mix of emotions at this revelation. Not surprise, certainly, but a final confirmation that despite 27 years as part of their household, I was still considered an outsider, not truly family. "I never expected anything from William," I replied honestly. Arthur nodded, his eyes sad but understanding. "Family is not always about blood or legal documents, Fernando. Remember that." I had no idea then how prophetic his words would prove to be. For the last several years of his life, my grandfather's health had been gradually declining. At 87, he had outlived many of his friends, and most of his family, maintaining his independence through sheer determination and the sharp mind that had served him well throughout his engineering career. During her illness, I took leave from work to be by her side as much as possible. William was present in his way, handling medical bills and logistics, but the emotional support came primarily from me and Arthur, who, despite being in his early 80s, visited daily. After her funeral, the distance between me and my stepfamily grew into a chasm. Without my mother as the connection, there was little reason for continued relationship. I respected his wishes, but increased the frequency of my visits, installing smart home devices that would alert me to any problems, and arranging for a local service to deliver meals and check on him daily. We settled into a routine where I would drive up from Boston every weekend, bringing groceries, handling home repairs, and, most importantly, enjoying long conversations about life, politics, and his endless collection of engineering projects. During these visits, Arthur often spoke about my mother, sharing stories from her childhood that I had never heard. He showed me old photographs, letters, she had written him during her college years, and even her childhood diary, which he had kept safe all these years. Through his memories, I felt connected to her in new ways, understanding her journey as a person beyond just being my mother. 3 months ago, during one of my regular visits, I noticed Arthur seemed unusually tired. His normally animated hands were still as he spoke, and he paused frequently to catch his breath. When I suggested we visit the doctor, he waved away my concern with a weak smile. "Just a cold. Nothing more," he insisted. But the following weekend, I arrived to find him confused and feverish. I took him to the emergency room immediately, where they diagnosed him with pneumonia and admitted him to the hospital. For the next week, I split my time between his bedside and working remotely from my laptop in the hospital waiting room. The doctors were cautiously optimistic at first, noting that despite his age, Arthur had always been remarkably healthy. However, his condition deteriorated rapidly. His body, strong as it had been, simply could not fight the infection at his advanced age. On a quiet Tuesday morning, with me holding his hand, Arthur took his final breath. His passing was peaceful, a gentle slipping away after a life well lived. The days that followed were a blur of funeral arrangements, paperwork, and the peculiar emptiness that comes with profound loss. Arthur had been my anchor, my true family, and without him, I felt adrift in a way I had not experienced since my mother's death. 2 weeks after the funeral, I received a call from Arthur's lawyer requesting a meeting. I had expected this, assuming there would be matters related to his house and modest savings that would need to be addressed. What I had not anticipated was the scale of what awaited me. Samuel Winters, the attorney who had handled Arthur's legal affairs for decades, welcomed me into his wood-paneled office with a sympathetic handshake. "Your grandfather spoke of you often, and with great pride," he said, as we settled into leather chairs. "He was quite deliberate in his estate planning." I nodded, expecting to hear about the house, and perhaps a small inheritance that would need to be managed. "Arthur updated his will 3 years ago, after your mother's passing." Samuel continued, opening a thick folder. "The document is quite straightforward. After some modest bequests to a few charities, he has left his entire estate to you, Fernando." I waited for additional details, perhaps other family members or organizations that would share in the inheritance. When Samuel remained silent, I asked, "What exactly does the estate include?" Samuel adjusted his glasses and glanced down at the paperwork, the house and its contents, of course. "There is also his retirement account, some stocks and bonds, and several investment properties that Arthur acquired over the years. Additionally, there was a substantial life insurance policy with you as the sole beneficiary." He slid a summary sheet across the desk. As my eyes scanned the total at the bottom, I felt the room tilt slightly. $3,240,000. I read aloud, my voice barely audible. Samuel nodded, seemingly unsurprised by my shock. "Your grandfather was quite a savvy investor. The properties alone have appreciated significantly since he purchased them in the 70s. He was also, if I may say, extremely frugal in his personal spending, preferring to build wealth that he intended for you to inherit." I sat back in my chair, overwhelmed. Arthur had never given any indication of this level of wealth. His home was comfortable but modest, his car practical and several years old. He had helped with my education, but never with extravagant amounts that would have hinted at substantial resources. He did not want you or anyone else treating him differently because of his financial status, Samuel explained, seeming to read my thoughts. Arthur believed money should be a tool, not an identity. He was quite clear that he wanted you to have the resources to build whatever life you envisioned for yourself. As I left the attorney's office that day, clutching a folder of documents that represented my new reality, I felt a complex mixture of grief and gratitude. The money could never replace what I had lost in Arthur, but it represented his enduring care and foresight, a final act of love from the man who had been my true father figure. I decided to take some time before making any decisions about the inheritance. I took a leave of absence from work, moved temporarily into Arthur's house to sort through his belongings, and began researching financial advisors who could help me manage this unexpected wealth responsibly. It was during this period of quiet reflection that the first message from my stepfamily arrived, a text from Patricia expressing belated condolences about Arthur's passing and suggesting we catch up soon. I responded with a brief thank you, thinking little of it. 3 days later, Gregory called, his voice overly warm as he inquired about how I was holding up and mentioned that the family should stick together during difficult times. Again, I was polite but non-committal. Then came the message from William himself, the first direct communication we had shared in over 2 years. "Fernando, I have been thinking about our family and how your mother would want us to remain connected. Perhaps you could join us for dinner this Sunday." The invitation was puzzling until I received a call from one of Arthur's neighbors, Dorothy, who had been friends with my grandparents for decades. During our conversation about some of Arthur's belongings she might like as mementos, she casually mentioned, "I ran into Patricia at the grocery store yesterday. She was telling everyone about your inheritance. $3 million, she said. The whole town is talking about it." Suddenly, the renewed interest from my stepfamily made perfect sense. News of the inheritance had spread, and now, after years of minimal contact and explicit exclusion from William's will, they were eager to reconnect with the stepson who had never quite been family enough. The realization brought not anger, but a strange sense of clarity. For the first time, I could see the transactional nature of their concept of family with perfect focus. I considered declining the dinner invitation, but after some reflection, decided to accept. Perhaps it was time for some honest conversation about what family truly meant. The house looked exactly as I remembered it, a stately colonial with perfectly trimmed hedges and a manicured lawn that William took great pride in maintaining himself, despite being well into his 70s. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed both Patricia's luxury SUV and Gregory's sports car already parked, indicating that this was to be a full family gathering. For a moment, I sat in my car gathering my thoughts. I had dressed casually, but neatly in slacks and a button-down shirt, refusing to make a statement either way with my appearance. I had also decided before arriving that I would remain calm, regardless of how the evening unfolded, not allowing myself to be baited into arguments or manipulated by appeals to emotion. Patricia answered the door, greeting me with an enthusiastic hug that felt foreign after years of distant nods and brief handshakes. "Fernando, it has been too long," she exclaimed, ushering me inside. At 42, she had maintained the polished appearance that had always been her hallmark, though fine lines around her eyes suggested the passage of years. The living room had been updated since my last visit with new furniture and a modern entertainment system, but the family photos on the mantel remained unchanged, still displaying the clear division between William's children and my portive daughter, mother and me. Gregory approached with a glass of wine already poured for me, his smile wider than I had ever seen it directed my way. "Good to have you back, Fernando. We were just saying how much we have missed having you around." At 44, he had developed a slight paunch, and his hairline had receded, but the confident demeanor of the golden child remained intact. William entered from the kitchen, looking older than his 76 years, with more stoop to his shoulders than I remembered. He extended his hand for a formal handshake, then awkwardly converted it to a brief, stiff hug. "Fernando, you look well. Thank you for coming." Also present were Patricia's husband, Robert, whom I had met only twice before, and Gregory's new girlfriend, Alyssa, who was clearly uncomfortable and had probably been briefed on the complex family dynamics shortly before my arrival. Dinner was served in the formal dining room, another space virtually unchanged from my childhood. The conversation started with safe topics, updates on careers, and brief anecdotes about mutual acquaintances from town. I participated politely, but minimally, waiting to see how long it would take for the real purpose of the gathering to emerge. It was Patricia who finally broached the subject, just as dessert was being served. "We were all so sorry to hear about Arthur," she began, her voice taking on a sympathetic tone that rang hollow after years of barely acknowledging my grandfather's existence. "He was such a special man. I remember how close you two always were." I nodded, saying simply, "He was the most important person in my life. He must have thought the world of you. Gregory added to leave you his entire estate like that. What a generous gesture." The statement hung in the air, an opening gambit so transparent that I almost laughed. Instead, I took a sip of my water and responded neutrally. Arthur was always generous. With his time, his knowledge, his love. William cleared his throat, setting down his fork with deliberate precision. "Fernando, we have been doing a lot of thinking since your grandfather's passing. About family, about connections, about the past." He glanced at his children, who nodded encouragingly. "I know things have not always been ideal between us, especially after your mother died. Dad feels terrible about the Wills situation," Patricia interjected eagerly. "It was a misunderstanding, really." "A misunderstanding," I repeated, keeping my voice even. William had the grace to look somewhat embarrassed. Perhaps that was the wrong word choice. "What I mean to say is that family is more than just legal documents. I may have been too rigid in my thinking." "I see," I said, allowing the silence to stretch uncomfortably. "And this realization came to you recently." Gregory jumped in, clearly wanting to move the conversation along. "What Dad is trying to say is that we want to rebuild our relationship with you. You are family regardless of blood." "That is interesting," I replied, because I distinctly remember being told that I was not family enough to be included in the will, that those provisions were for William's children only. The room grew tense, the pretense of casual family dinner beginning to fray. People changed their minds. William said defensively, "I have been rethinking many things as I get older, as have I." I agreed, particularly about what constitutes real family. Patricia exchanged a glance with Gregory before leaning forward. "Speaking of family and support, we actually wanted to discuss something with you. Robert and I have been looking at starting a small business, a boutique marketing firm. We have the experience and connections, but startup capital has been an issue." And there it was, the first direct approach. Gregory quickly followed with his own pitch. "And I have been looking at investment properties in the downtown area. The returns could be significant with the right initial funding." I looked between them then at William, who was studying his dessert with sudden intense interest. "How much were you thinking of asking for?" I inquired, my tone still measured. Patricia brightened, mistaking my question for interest. "We have detailed business plans. For the marketing firm, we would need about 400,000 to really do it right. Gregory's property investment would be around the same. So nearly $1 million between the two projects," I summarized. "It would be an investment, not a gift." Gregory clarified quickly. "You would be a stakeholder, of course." "Of course," I echoed. "And William, do you also have a venture requiring investment?" My stepfather looked uncomfortable. "My retirement portfolio has not performed as well as expected in recent years. I may need to make some adjustments to maintain my standard of living. Nothing immediate, but something to consider for the future." I sat back in my chair, taking in the three expectant faces before me. The moment stretched as I considered my response. "You know," I finally said, "I have been thinking a lot about family too, about what it means to be included or excluded, about conditional versus unconditional belonging." Their expressions began to shift as they sensed the direction of my thoughts. For 15 years I lived in this house, sat at this table, and was reminded in countless small ways that I was not quite family. When my mother died, that tenuous connection was deemed expendable. Now, after years of minimal contact, I receive an inheritance, and suddenly there is renewed interest in our relationship. That timing is remarkable. Would you not agree? Patricia began to protest, but I held up a hand gently. Please let me finish. I do not harbor resentment for how things were. I understand that blended families are complicated. What I will not accept is the pretense that this sudden desire to reconnect is anything other than financial interest. The room fell silent. Robert stared at his plate, while Alyssa examined her nails, both clearly wishing to be elsewhere. William, Patricia, and Gregory exchanged uncomfortable glances. That is not fair, Patricia finally said, though her voice lacked conviction. We genuinely want to rebuild our relationship. Then let us do exactly that, I replied calmly. Let us rebuild a relationship based on authentic connection, not financial transactions. I am open to getting to know each other as adults, to finding out who we are now, and if there is a foundation for meaningful family bonds. And the business opportunities, Gregory asked cautiously. Those would need to wait until such a foundation exists, if it ever does. I will not be financing projects for people who have shown interest in me only after learning about my inheritance. William's face hardened slightly. You seem to have developed quite an attitude with this newfound wealth. Not an attitude, I corrected him. Clarity and boundaries. The same ones that allowed you to exclude me from your will because I was not family enough are the ones that now allow me to protect myself from opportunistic reconnections. I stood up, placing my napkin beside my half-finished dessert. Thank you for dinner. If anyone is genuinely interested in rebuilding a relationship without financial motivations, I would welcome that conversation. Otherwise, I wish you all well. No one tried to stop me as I walked to the front door. No desperate pleas or angry accusations followed me down the driveway. Just silence. And perhaps, if I was not mistaken, a newfound respect. As I drove away from the house that had never truly been my home, I felt not bitterness, but liberation. For the first time in my life, I had set clear terms for my relationship with my stepfamily from a position of strength rather than yearning for acceptance. In the months following that pivotal dinner, I made significant decisions about my life and the inheritance that had so dramatically altered my circumstances. The first order of business was securing my financial future while honoring Arthur's legacy. I assembled a team of professionals, a financial advisor, an accountant, and an estate attorney, all vetted through Samuel, to help me navigate my new reality responsibly. Together, we created a diversified investment strategy that would preserve and grow the principal while generating income I could live on comfortably. I decided to keep several of Arthur's investment properties that produced steady rental income, but sold 2 others to reinvest in more updated buildings with better energy efficiency. The question of Arthur's house was more emotional than financial. Eventually, I decided to keep it, renovating it to serve as a weekend retreat while maintaining my apartment in Boston for everyday life. Being in the space where I had spent so many meaningful hours with my grandfather brought comfort rather than sadness, and I found myself continuing some of his traditions, like Sunday morning coffee on the back porch watching birds at the, quote, feeders he had meticulously maintained for decades. Beyond financial considerations, I wanted to honor Arthur's values in how I used the inheritance. He had always been a quiet philanthropist, supporting local education initiatives and engineering scholarships without fanfare. Following his example, I established a foundation in his name that would fund scholarships for students pursuing engineering degrees, with preference given to those who, like me, came from non-traditional family structures and might lack robust support systems. The foundation became my passion project, occupying much of the time I had taken as extended leave from my tech job. Working with local schools and colleges to identify deserving students gave me a sense of purpose and connection to Arthur's legacy that no luxury purchase could have provided. As for my stepfamily, the aftermath of our dinner conversation unfolded in interesting ways. 2 weeks passed with no contact, then a month. I assumed they had written me off entirely after realizing there would be no easy access to my inheritance. Then, unexpectedly, I received an email from Patricia. Unlike her previous communications, this one was brief and devoid of excessive warmth or hidden agendas. She apologized for her approach at dinner, acknowledged the transactional nature of the reunion attempt, and expressed genuine regret for the years of subtle exclusion during our childhood. She ended by saying she would understand if I preferred no further contact, but would welcome the opportunity for a fresh start if I were open to it. The sincerity of her message surprised me. After careful consideration, I replied that I would be willing to meet for coffee with no expectations on either side. Our meeting was awkward at first, but gradually evolved into an honest conversation about our shared past from our differing perspectives. She admitted that, as a child, she had resented my presence as a disruption to her family unit after her mother's death, and that resentment had calcified into habit over the years. Similar, though less dramatic, reconciliation occurred with Gregory several months later. I assumed they had written me off entirely after realizing there would be no easy access to my inheritance. Then, unexpectedly, I received an email from Patricia. Unlike her previous communications, this one was brief and devoid of excessive warmth or hidden agendas. She apologized for her approach at dinner, acknowledged the transactional nature of the reunion attempt, and expressed genuine regret for the years of subtle exclusion during our childhood. His perspective did not surprise me, nor did it cause the pain it once might have. My inheritance provided not just financial security, but the freedom to reevaluate all my relationships through a clearer lens. I reconnected with college friends I had lost touch with during the demanding years of my tech career. I developed deeper bonds with coworkers who shared my interests outside of the office. Most significantly, I began dating Sophia, a children's book illustrator I met through my foundation work, whose warmth and creative spirit brought new joy to my life. Through these authentic connections, I came to understand what Arthur had tried to teach me all along, that family is defined not by blood or legal documents, but by consistent presence, mutual respect, and unconditional support. I found family and friends who showed up during difficult times in mentors, who guided me without agenda, and in my growing relationship with Sophia, who loved me for myself rather than what I could provide. The money that had initially seemed to be the most significant aspect of Arthur's legacy ultimately proved to be secondary to the wisdom he had shared throughout our years together. I assembled a team of professionals, a financial advisor, an accountant, and an estate attorney, all vetted through Samuel, to help me navigate my new reality responsibly. Together, we created a diversified investment strategy that would preserve and grow the principal while generating income I could live on comfortably. His perspective did not surprise me, nor did it cause the pain it once might have. My inheritance provided not just financial security, but the freedom to reevaluate all my relationships through a clearer lens. I reconnected with college friends I had lost touch with during the demanding years of my tech career. I developed deeper bonds with coworkers who shared my interests outside of the office. I learned to distinguish between those who value me for who I am and those who see me as a means to an end. I discovered that family can be chosen and created, not merely inherited or legally defined. Arthur's most precious gift was not the $3 million that temporarily made me the talk of Greenfield. It was the example he set of living with integrity, generosity, and clear-eyed assessment of the relationships in his life. It was the confidence he instilled in me to define family on my own terms, to set boundaries where necessary, and to invest my heart where it would be genuinely valued. Have you ever experienced a moment that suddenly clarified which relationships in your life were authentic and which were conditional? How did you respond to that realization? Share your experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, Please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to my channel for more reflections on family dynamics, personal growth, and navigating life's unexpected turns. Thank you for joining me on this journey of discovery. And remember that true family is defined not by obligation or convenience, but by consistent love, respect, and genuine presence in each other's lives through both challenges and celebration.